Yeah, I imagine how hard it is to first to go through a divorce.
I think my question to you is like there are some challenges which are existing.
The first question I ask people is, what passports do you hold? So going back to your question, well, then you can qualify for an E2 visa because you have a UK passport. I have a singular focus when I focus on presidential elections.
My last question to you, Steve, here is if let's say you become the US president.
There's no question with that.
Hi, Steve. How are you doing today?
Hi, Atal. I'm doing great. Thank you.
So I'm here today with Steve Maggi. He is an immigration attorney, and I thought it's just good to get a perspective, like an honest perspective about the state of immigration. So just like recording this episode with our audience to help them understand, like, what an immigration attorney thinks about the whole state of immigration, what immigrants bring to the table in this world. And you being an immigrant, I feel like is such an inspiring story about you turning your journey into an immigration law firm now. So happy to go deep into it. So Steve, how about we just like maybe start with like, your early days. You were born in Argentina or US? I mean, I want to understand more about it.
Yeah, so I am an immigrant. I was born in a small town in the southwest part of Argentina called San Carlos de Bariloche. My mother was born in New York City, and her parents were immigrants from Hungary.
Hungary. Okay.
So they came to the U.S. in the 1930s and met actually separately, and then met in Midtown Manhattan and ended up getting married and having my mom. And she moved to Argentina when she was 18 because she wanted to study art, and her parents had friends in Argentina. So she went to Argentina at 18. That's where she met my father. My father.
So your mother met your father in Argentina.
Correct.
Okay. When she was 18 and she was like studying art in New York City.
She was born and raised in New York City, but she moved to Argentina at 18.
Okay.
To study art.
Okay, got
She
it.
didn't want to be in the U.S.
Argentina is known for art, right? Like
Argentina is a very cultural country. And she was very bold because she was 18 and she moved to a country that she didn't speak the language.
Yeah.
And it's a very what they call machista country. It's very sort of pro-masculine, pro-man. The civil rights movement and the women's rights movement was way behind in Argentina compared to the U.S. So it was a very bold thing to do.
Yeah, like I can imagine. I mean, a lot of Americans, when I see, they are less inclined to go outside. I mean, there are a lot of people who actually are explorers who are actually moving out of the US.
Yeah.
But there are very few people like that. But like for a woman to choose to like be like, hey, I want to like just explore as she turned 18, that's like by itself a very big move. Yeah.
Right, and this is the 1960s.
1960.
And
Wow.
3 days after she moved to Argentina, the tanks rolled in and the military dictatorship took over the country.
Argentina.
Yes.
Wow.
And for 18 years, it was under military dictatorship. So when I was born in 1974, it was under a military dictatorship. It was a very dangerous time. She became a painter. My father was a writer. And so they met in these artistic circles in Buenos Aires. And she was there 5 years before she met him. And then they got married and had me. And when they decided to split, when I was 5 years old, she brought me back to the U.S. But there was a big problem there, which is that I could not qualify for a passport. Usually, if you're born to a U.S. citizen parent, you can get a passport,
so
right?
Let's understand this. Like, I'm just like looking at from your parents' perspective.
Yeah.
They are like, okay, your mom is like very much like, hey, I want to learn. And she met your father and they both stayed all together in like Argentina. And then your mom is like, okay, they separated and she's like, I want to come back to my country, right?
Correct.
And she wants to bring her baby, like you're a 5-year-old, right, kid?
Yeah.
Like, hey, how can you come here? And you are like, hey, there was no way for me to have a passport at that time. Like, it's just complicated.
Yeah. We talk about this a lot with our clients too. There's so many intricacies and really there's so many what we call fallacies or inconsistencies in the law. So why should a person who's born in the U.S. and lives there for 18 years be penalized because they didn't live in the U.S. for 1 year after the age of 18? That's what happened.
So the U.S. immigration law says that even if you're born in the U.S. and you stay here till 18 and you leave the U.S. after 18, then you cannot have your kids given the U.S. citizenship?
Correct.
I mean, I didn't actually know this until now. So you're saying if she would have stayed like for one more year, like until 19, she would be okay, but it's just like
correct.
18.
if she had shown 365 days of physical presence in the U.S. after the age of 18,
Oh my.
then I would have gotten a U.S. passport. But that didn't happen.
Huh.
I don't even know, honestly, how I came into the country. Maybe she got me a tourist visa, I guess. And then it took 9 years to become a resident and then to what's called naturalized. So I moved to a country where I don't speak the language. I didn't want to move to a different place. I loved being a child in Argentina.
Yeah.
You know, there's a part of me, as you know, with the immigrants, our hearts are always back. You know, half our heart is always left where we came from. And that's how I still feel now. And I'm okay with that dichotomy, you know, having a dual identity.
I mean, in a way, if I think about it, it's like we are all seeking belonging on this planet. We are all seeking like that connection. And for us, that connection is not beyond one country. Like for us, it's just, and I mean, it's not that we don't have a connection here. It's just we have a connection in two countries.
Correct. And we have two parts of ourselves that are equally important, but that will always be part of our identity.
Yeah, they will both. And that's like the unique part about being an immigrant, that we want to be identified as both the identities and we want both the countries to succeed together.
Correct.
Right? So you always be like, hey, I want to support Argentinians, right? And I want to support Americans because there is a part of me which is Argentinian. And I mean, I want to bring and help my community, right? You know?
That, and also that's what creates that empathy that I have with people from anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because I understand how they can feel like they have two identities, but they just want the opportunity to make the most of their life in the U.S. And so that's what I try to do, because I did the same thing. I ended up becoming a founder of my own law firm to be able to help all those people.
So let's go into this now. So as your mom turned 18, she moved there, and you were born, she didn't live here. So, I mean, you were born like when she was probably like, she got married
she was 27.
27. So she lived there for like, I would say
14 years.
14 years. Okay. So for 9 years, she lived there. And then after 9-10 years, you were born. And then she's like, okay, I want to come back here. And she's not able to figure out how to get you as her son to be able to live in her country, right?
Correct.
It's like frustrating for her.
Yeah, I imagine how hard it is to first to go through a divorce.
Yeah.
It's traumatic. But then you move to another continent.
Yeah.
Then you add a new language and a new city and a new culture. New York City is very different than a lot of places, right? And on top of that, you don't know what the status of your child is.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was translated to me or communicated directly because I was young, but you already feel like you don't fit in when you move to a new country and a new language. Mm-hmm. But then when you realize you don't even know what your status is, you feel like the country doesn't want you.
Yeah.
And that's a very painful feeling to have.
Yeah. I mean, a part of me always, as an Indian immigrant, I think it's about this desire to be accepted in the country. I think it's less about like whether I live here or not. It's like being accepted as a human being. And I think when immigration law kind of like puts you on odd sides of it, where on one side you are like, yeah, I belong here because people accept me here. And then the immigration law is like, no, hell no. You know, it's kind of funny to me when I look at it that way.
I didn't understand how important it was to feel accepted until I was at that naturalization ceremony where you take the oath.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw people all around me with different faces and different colors and different ethnicities and everything. And they were all crying. They were all so happy. And the relief to feel like, wow, now I'm finally part of this country.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my journey was 9 years, but some people, maybe it takes them 20 years. The people from India, even very experienced and professional people, might take 20 years to eventually become U.S. citizens because of all the barriers there are.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very powerful for me. I still remember the emotion that I felt. And I've attended those ceremonies now also as an attorney. And it reinvigorates you, reminds you of why you fight so hard to get your clients to that point, right?
Yeah. So let's go into your journey. Now you came to the US with your mother, and your mother is trying to figure out how to get you into a better path.
Yeah.
So initial few years were a lot of struggle for her. Like, then how did she kind of figure out, like, okay, after 9 years, what was the journey like?
I don't know exactly what the process was. And that's what made me more inquisitive about how does this system work?
Yeah.
You know, I really wanted to understand it. And the law is always evolving. The law itself, as it's written, hasn't changed since 1986.
Yeah.
But this was 1979. It was sort of the Wild West.
So it's like people talk about immigration law not changing, as if like it's a recent thing, but you are talking about 1970s. Like, I mean, you are talking about the stories of 1970s where a mother is trying to bring her kid into her home country,
Yeah.
but she was born and she's having a hard time.
I just had a call last week with somebody who adopted a child from Bangladesh, and they could not get their child citizenship. They have to go through this whole separate process. And she said, it took me 5 years to get my child a green card. And I said, I know exactly how you feel because I went through the same thing. The circumstances are a little different. The country is different, but it shows that the law does not evolve.
Yeah, the law has not evolved. I mean, I think we will go into this, like what is the right thing to do, because there's a lot of desire among people to come to America too. Like there is a movement happening, then there must be something very special about this country, which is bringing in a lot of people like, hey, I want to be here. But let's go into your story. So your mom figured it out.
Well, she must have had an immigration attorney who knew what they were doing.
And then tell me like your early life, like after 9 years, you have your citizenship, and then how did you get to immigration?
Personally, what happened was I grew up really poor. So I was a single child, an only child with my mom living in Spanish Harlem in New York during what's called the crack epidemic. So there was a huge epidemic in New York where there were a lot of drug addicts. Drugs were readily accessible. There were a lot of gangs. So I grew up in a neighborhood where there were gangs everywhere, violence. About half my junior high school classmates the males did not live to 18.
Half of your
junior high school classmates
did not live up to 18.
Correct.
Because of the drugs.
Because either gangs or drugs.
Oh my God.
And that was the environment that I grew up in. So I realized, and my mom instilled this in me, but my mom didn't go to college. My father didn't go to college. So I decided that education was my way out. And so I worked really hard in school. I ended up going to a school called Stuyvesant High School, which is a specialized school. And that's your ticket to college, right? If you can get through that, it was harder than college, I would say.
So when we look at America, there is a very rosy picture. Only one side we know, and here we are talking about there are real challenges on the ground, especially the neighborhood and all that you grew up in. Now there is life in Argentina. Argentina by itself is going through a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
How do you? I mean, did you go to Argentina a lot during these years?
I didn't go to Argentina at all because
my God,
my mother blamed my father for the separation, and she said that essentially he abandoned us. And so I had to side with my mother, and I blocked that part of my life out.
Even now?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. What happened was I was in North Carolina, Chapel Hill for college, and the ex-president of Argentina, who took Argentina out of the dictatorship and brought democracy, his name was Raúl Alfonsín, was sort of my hero. He was speaking at an event at my college, and then they invited me to a little meeting of just Argentine nationals and him. It was 15 of us in a room with one of the greatest people in the history of my home country, right? And I realized then that I had a very emotional moment where I was crying after, and I realized I wanted to reconnect with Argentina.
Because there is a part of you which is because being born in Argentina, there's a part of you which is I want to connect with my ancestry, right? I want to connect with my community too on that side, right?
Yeah, and that also coincided with the '94 World Cup, where Argentina was playing in the U.S. The World Cup was in the U.S. And I had a dream about Diego Maradona, who's our greatest player of all time. I had a dream about him, and that at 2 a.m. I decided to go to the train station from New York City and take the train to Boston. And I found I bought a ticket on the street, and I saw him play. And I saw 60,000 Argentine flags and people singing, and I realized this is a big part of me that I was kind of pushing away.
This was in Boston?
Boston. Of course.
So you got connected with your Argentinian ancestry in 1994 from this World Cup match.
From this match. And then just a few months later, I met the president of the ex-president of the country.
And then you went back to Argentina after?
I went back after I graduated, before I went to law school. I went back for a year, and my father, who was living in Spain, had moved back the same 2 weeks that I had gone to visit. I hadn't had any contact with him.
So then you got connected.
Yes, and we reunited. And then my plan after that was to go to law school and eventually move back to Argentina. And I did. I moved back for 8 years. That's when I started my law firm. So I started my U.S. immigration law firm in 2004. From Argentina.
From Argentina. Wow,
Uh,
very cool. So after going to college, you became an attorney. Now you are trying to figure out which field of attorney you should choose, and you chose immigration as the one to practice.
I did, but it also chose me.
Because it's a part of your story in a way.
It was, but also because I was at Georgetown and I won a fellowship. I applied for a fellowship,
Mhm.
and that fellowship allowed me to work at an immigration clinic
Oh,
for the first summer of law school.
Mhm.
And then I realized this is what I want to do.
because you find a lot of joy in helping other immigrants.
I was given 3 weeks to prepare an asylum case,
Uh-huh.
and I learned two things doing that. First, that it was very high stakes. We were representing a couple from Togo, from West Africa, that was part of the pro-democracy movement, and they had death threats
Mm.
from the military dictatorship there, that if they returned, they would be killed.
Mm.
So the attorney said, I want you to work on this case with me. And I did. And then the day of the actual hearing, he said, you are first chair. You're going to do the case.
Wow.
5 minutes before the
Uh,
case.
uh,
And then 3 hours later, and I've never been so scared in my life. I was doing the interviewing and talking to the judge, and I'm just a, 25-year-old kid.
uh,
They granted asylum,
uh,
and all the people stood up and they were crying and they were so happy. And I realized two things. Number one, I loved immigration. And number two, I did not want to do asylum because it's so high stakes.
high stakes.
Like
Because
my
if
strength,
it is like very emotional on you. It's like losing is not an option because someone's life is at stake.
losing is not an option. And I still have that same mentality when it comes to doing what I call transactional immigration or visa work,
Mhm.
working with the embassies, working on petitions. But my strength and my love is my writing,
Right.
because I have a journalism background. So that's what I decided to focus on.
Mm.
Asylum is way too contingent upon the specific judge that you get.
Mm.
And that's very political. And I didn't want to be in that realm.
Very cool. So now let's go into your story. You moved to Argentina. You are like, now I'm feeling very good about my life. I'm connecting with my ancestry. I'm back with like Argentina, and this vibe is back in you. You're like American plus Argentinian. You're like, feeling full. You are like in Argentina trying to build a US immigration law firm,
Yeah.
like 5 years, 6 years in, and I mean 8 years in. How did that go? I mean, it's pretty hard to build a firm start in from
Well,
another
it was a heart decision.
Uh-huh.
You
Yeah.
know, as an attorney, you try to think with your mind first. But as a Latin person, my heart leads. That's what led me to go home.
Yeah.
And then I
It's
just
kind of funny when you said this, like, my heart leads as a Latin American. I think a lot of Indian culture is very much in a very similar way. I think the culture is very much about like love and romance, and there are parts of our lifestyle which are
Mhm.
much beyond transactions. Like, yeah, our mind is like, yeah, I gotta make money, but at the same time, there is like this emotional part of it which seeks to fulfill itself. So
Yeah,
interesting.
and the emotional part of and the empathy and is what fuels how well you do your job. I think you have to have the foundation, the theoretical underpinning, and understand the law.
Mm.
But if you're not passionate about it, especially in immigration, the results won't be there. This is not a plug and play profession. You have to be, involved and invested emotionally in what you do.
Mhm.
And so I think that what happened to me was I realized very quickly, had a website built and started publishing ads on Google,
Mhm.
and I taught myself the basics of the law.
Mm.
And then I got flooded with calls because I was the only U.S. immigration attorney in Argentina. I didn't know that, but in the listings, I would be right after the embassy. So I had no choice but to become really good at it because people needed my help. And they preferred to see someone face to face versus working with a lawyer in the US.
Got it. So you found good amount of like business and support in Argentina as you were trying to build this firm. Then what made you actually move to the US?
My father passed away, and the ties with Argentina weren't as strong anymore. But mostly it was because I'm somebody that's always been self-motivated, like a lot of immigrants. And I hit a ceiling. I was only helping, 1% of people. I wanted to help people from all over the world. And so I was crazy enough to leave a successful practice behind in Argentina and start from zero in New York City, which had more immigration lawyers than anywhere in the U.S.
So it's like a very competitive field there. Like,
It's incredibly, I mean, there are thousands of immigration attorneys, and I had to work really hard to build the practice again. But now I've worked with people from about 80 different countries.
Wow.
And worked, presented cases in 50 different U.S. embassies and consulates. It's doing exactly what I hoped. And now that I'm sort of bi-coastal and I help people all over the U.S. as well, I feel like I've reached a lot of those objectives that I had. I could have taken the easy road, which would have to stay in Argentina, but I decided I wanted to maximize the potential, just like a lot of immigrants. So I moved back to the U.S.
Got it. So you came back to the U.S., built this firm in New York. Now you are based in Florida.
I am.
What made you move to Florida?
That was just a personal decision. Like at some point, I think one of the things you realize when you're from a country that really stresses work-life balance, like Argentina does, you go back to that, because in New York, that does not exist.
But I mean, I think work-life balance just does not exist in the world. Even as we have been working, I feel like when there is passion, the work-life balance concept is on the side because you are always like enjoying it. So, I mean, I think maybe we call it a state of flow where you are like, yeah, I'm flowing in this process enough for me to even think about work-life balance. Yeah, like everyone would like to have a family and everything, but at the same time, when you're in the flow, you're in the flow.
You are, and every time we do events together, or I meet new immigrants, I'm always thinking, I want to help them, and I want to help this person or that person. And my goal of helping people does not have a limit.
Yeah.
So what I do is I just build a really good team. You can always build more good quality team members to make sure you don't sacrifice the quality of the work. But what I love most about what I do is the connections I have with my clients and their stories, and transforming their story from what I want to do to what I am doing, because I was able to help them.
Very cool. So I think now, Steve, as you shared, you have built out a successful firm. You are helping a lot of immigrants with different visas. You have helped with O1, EB1s, I think my question to you is like, there are some challenges which are existing in the immigration system. And as we know, and we help people who are from India or China, they are just kind of separated in a separate line in the immigration because of like the laws. And I mean, as someone, I mean, we were talking about acceptance, it's very hard to feel accepted when you are getting discriminated on your face as being born in India. What do you think about that?
I think it gives me it pains me to admit that the U.S. immigration system is not colorblind. It's not open. It doesn't apply equally to all, right? There's something called the Equal Protection Clause, which is the fundamental underpinning of our law. And as you've seen over time, the law does not apply equally to all. And that's abundantly clear, especially in immigration. Nobody seems to put the spotlight on it because immigrants a lot of times don't have a voice. But in my opinion, this should be a merit-based system where the nationality of someone is almost irrelevant for the purposes of getting a visa or getting a green card. And that's not the case. There are actually categories specific to countries. Like there's the TN visa for Mexican and Canadian professionals. There's the E3 visa just for Australian people with university degrees. Well, what if you were born in New Zealand and not in Australia, or you were born in Pakistan and not in India? Why does that give you an advantage or a disadvantage? And I think that's a fundamental problem. I think another problem is that there are caps, which means there are limitations annually per country for each of these categories. A lot of them. There are some that don't, and we try to use those as much as we can. But why should somebody from India have to wait 15 years to get their green card? And if somebody from the bordering country of Pakistan, which was once part of India, why do they get to have their green card in 2 years, and somebody from India with the same qualifications takes 15? And so I think there's a lot of things that maybe made sense back, 40 years ago to the U.S. government. If you look at the history of U.S. immigration, there have been quotas by country, and there have even been temporary bars on visas, like for China, there was one for many years that just don't apply to today's society, because what we need is as many experienced and capable people as possible to drive our industry.
So, I think thanks for sharing your perspective on this. Now, I go deep into this, like understanding why country caps exist. Like, what are your thoughts about like just the history of country caps? Because I mean, there was probably a movement where at some point China was discriminated. People from born in China were discriminated. And I mean, I think I look at it from an American Constitution perspective, from like 1776, the fundamental values of America, which talks about that, hey, you will never be discriminated. And I mean, I read about Martin Luther King and his fight for like saying that I want to be judged on the basis of my character, not based on my color, skin color. And the same fight even exists that, hey, I don't want to be judged on the basis of where I was born, because I am a human being, no less, no more than any other being. And I just want to be treated as that.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think, like, because US has like a history of this.
It absolutely does. There's a great documentary series on Netflix that has to do with the Equal Protection Clause. And it talks about African Americans, it talks about women, it talks about, LGBT community. And then the last episode, the last frontier, really, to use sort of a Star Trek term, is immigrants. Because it's the law, according to the law, the Equal Protection Clause should apply to all people.
Yeah.
That should also include immigrants, and they're not treated the same. They're treated very differently. In fact, the first question I ask people is, what passports do you hold? Because if you have two passports, let's say you're from India, but you have a UK passport, well, then you can qualify for an E2 visa because you have a UK passport. It's the first question I ask. Or what passports does your spouse have? Because that will give you access. And I think it's unfair that the system works that way, because if it's merit-based, you're not limiting the talent or the investment, which is hugely important to move our country forward, based on something silly, a technicality, which is which passports you have.
So, I mean, what do you think from the perspective of American forefathers about the immigration law that we see today? Like, do you think they wanted like this kind of discrimination, or like, I mean, because I don't think they had any idea that it's going to turn into something like this.
Yeah, I mean, one of my majors in college was history. So there has been a lot of contradiction from I don't want to disparage the founding fathers. But they were really contemplating one thing only when they started this country, which is to try to keep us from being oppressed as a nation and from being taken over again by the British or anybody else, right? It was all about independence. But equal rights was never something they really thought about. And that's clear because between 1776 and 1865, there was slavery.
Yeah.
And slavery might still have continued if the cotton gin wasn't more productive than a human being. There's an economic underpinning. I did my thesis on that in college. It wasn't just a human rights decision to abolish slavery, right? So they were very contradictory, and interest in the South and the North were very different, right? And then it wasn't until the country expanded with Manifest Destiny and there was a need for railroad workers and things like that, that immigrants became really an important part of that equation. Immigrants have always done the work that nobody else wants to do. And it still happens in today. Like, we go outside this beautiful garden here in San Francisco into a restaurant. If we go into the kitchen, there's probably people who are immigrants working there because they have jobs that nobody else wants to take. And that has been consistent since immigrants started coming to the U.S., especially post-Civil Wars, really. Like 1890s and 1920s were the biggest immigration waves based on famines and strife and things happening in Europe, especially, right? That still happens in today's age. The problem is now our arms are not open.
So this is such a great lesson on history. Starting with 1776, you said American forefathers did not want the country to be oppressed. They wanted this to be more of an independent country, which will continue to get the best people. I mean, not being oppressed simply means they want this to be always being on the top. Like, just like
No, I think what I'm trying to say is that they were scared that they would be taken over again.
Taken over again by the British.
Or
Uh,
within the political system. That's why you have federalism, where you have the checks and balances between the different branches, but you have federalism where you have states that can overrule, federal, and you have both laws existing at the same time. But now with Roe versus Wade, abortion, and all these other issues, the legalization of drugs, all this is something that's still a big issue today because they were so scared that the federal government would take too much control. And then it could become almost like a dictatorship. And so that's why we have this incredibly convoluted legal system where things are changing every day. The courts overrule this, and then you have laws that are passed or not passed, but then the states override that. It's for anyone coming from a civil code country, which is 90% of the world, it's incredibly confusing. And the immigration system has its own courts and it has its own jurisprudence. And so it's also very complex. People don't realize how complex it is.
Yeah, it's super complex. I mean, I have a hard time understanding even now sometimes. I think if we go into like the thinking behind America, it does not because I mean, whenever I look at America, I'm like, America does not care what happens in the rest of the world, which is about independence. Like you can be like whatever skin color, whatever religion you have, it does not matter. Or whatever nation you are born in. Like for America, we are an independent, like, a nation. Independent. We are independent. We think different, right?
Right.
But then that's the Constitution that says, right? But then all these laws come into picture, like the immigration law, which is like country cap or this treatment or this treatment. Now, where do you see like, and we are all about like, hey, merit is the right way to live a great life or live for the world. Yeah. Right.
Yes.
When I look at like Roman emperors who have been like, I just like respect some of them. And I'm like, okay, they were leaders in the world. They got in power, not because of where they were born into their families, not just that, but some of the leaders were like, they were taken into the Roman Empire to lead, like Marcus Aurelius, who's like, just because they were good, they were good. They were the best people to lead the world. And merit kind of in a way, I think, ensures that you have the best people leading the world. Who not because of where they were born or anything. And now we are going to an economy which is very much a global economy, right? And in a global economy, people who should lead are like, who are the best thinkers? Like, let's say Elon Musk is like taking humanity ahead. So, I mean, where do you position?
There's a disconnect. And I think you've actually touched on it without even necessarily wanting to, but there's a disconnect between progress and immigration policy in terms of the mentality. Like people, if you look at the debate, like the one we had recently, the economy was a conversation, and then immigration was another conversation, but they're actually directly related because people don't realize there's a direct correlation between good immigration, good merit-based immigration, and the economy.
Yeah, I mean, talent is in the end, the world runs on talent. Economy runs on talent. If you can get the best talent, the economy is going to grow.
But there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
And it's the level of resistance that I've seen for over 20 years that I still see to really strong petitions that include investment that will create jobs. There's a disconnect there because that's direct job creation. The government doesn't have to create it. It just has to facilitate it by allowing people to come. You have 55% of the almost 600 unicorn companies in the U.S. that have co-founders that are immigrants, and 50% of startups in this area in Silicon Valley have at least one immigrant co-founder. A lot of them, their main founders, the people who conceptualized it, like Sergey Brin from Google, for example. Without Sergey being able to immigrate and get his legalized status here, our whole world might be different if he's the one that helped conceptualize
the
Google that has changed all our lives.
Yeah.
There's many examples of that. Maybe sometimes they're behind the scenes, but they're driving the economy that creates hundreds of thousands of jobs in the U.S. And I think that's completely undervalued in that discussion. There's a disconnect there. Maybe Elon Musk and others are starting to make people realize how important, like if Elon Musk came from South Africa through Canada and he wasn't allowed to do what he's been able to do in the US, and forget the politics or however you feel about the product, created a lot of jobs. It's changed a lot of people's lives.
It created a new sense of ambition in humanity, like, that, hey, we can go towards space and
Yeah, that's true.
we can think beyond Earth. It's just like, and it's a gift to the entire human race. It's not a gift. It's great. There should be a gratefulness that he is doing it in America, but it's a gift to the entire human race because he's putting the whole ambition of human race forward in like, hey, what else we can achieve.
I saw a
Yeah.
SpaceX launch at Cape Canaveral, and that's what I was thinking. I saw it fly up in the sky, and I thought, if it weren't for immigration, this might not be happening.
Yeah. And I mean, what I see is like there are so many immigrants who are stuck in the backlog or here and there. And I'm like, each of them to me is an Elon Musk. I am like, they can all take the world ahead and create more ambition for human race if we support them and if we give them the right support they need. I mean, I think human resource is such a powerful thing. Like if we start understanding like how to leverage that human resource, where instead of being an inhibitor to their growth, we become like an enabler in their growth and allow them to go on their own journey.
I think it's a mentality. This country has been an isolationist country on and off, for a long time. You look at World War II, the U.S. was staying out of the war until the attack happened in Pearl Harbor. So that mentality of we're just going to be on our own and do our own thing means that they're not welcoming immigrants as much as they should. And there's a direct correlation. If you look at Germany, is an incredible example. Under Merkel, they changed their immigration policies. I don't know all the specifics, but I know that they minimized or eliminated caps on professional visas. And there was a reverse drain, what they call brain drain, where even Indians who had studied in the U.S. felt much more welcome there.
Well, in the end, it matters how you feel, how to make someone feel that.
Absolutely. It matters to everybody. Like one of my clients said once, they said, if the U.S. doesn't want me, I'm going to take my business somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they were, they could have created dozens of jobs. Yeah. And you can poo-poo it. Like these small startups that I work with, they might create 6 or 7 jobs. But if I'm helping 500 of them, that's 3,000 jobs. That changes communities. That changes lives.
And that keeps the talent and the innovation also in this country, or, I mean, just like progressing in the right way for the world overall. I mean, we talk about China as like, okay, this is a communist country where people are not accepted. And I mean, we talk about America as like, okay, everyone is accepted, but then some people are still not accepted here. So it's kind of confusing.
When does that threshold moment come where the American dream and that concept is starting to get diluted? Where people's realities are, I don't really think America wants me, so I'm going to take my talents and my in my capital somewhere else. And I've definitely come across people that are discouraged, especially from countries where there are these huge backlogs based on these completely unnecessary caps that are thinking in the back of their mind, why should I stay here and raise my family here if the country doesn't want me?
I mean, I have seen a lot of my friends moving back recently because they have been like, I'm done with it. And I think it has to do with more of, they have been living in this country for a while now. And now they're like, I'm stuck with my employer.
Yeah.
And I want to do something more. And, as human beings, we are like always evolving. And they're like, I have evolved from my old phase of like seeking a job to be a job creator. But I'm not able to, but the immigration system is not allowing me to be evolved as a human being.
Right. And I think that's where I come in a lot of cases. I ask people that one of the first questions I ask them is, do you want to put on an employee hat or an entrepreneur hat?
Yeah.
Because the mentalities are 100% different. They couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
But if they have the capacity to take that leap of faith to become an entrepreneur and to have a plan that benefits the U.S., and that's the underpinning for a lot of these visas, there are options available for anybody, including Indian nationals, Chinese, etc. And that's most of the visas that I work on. It's the ones that empower them, because otherwise it's almost like what they call indentured servitude, where you're kind of beholden to this employer and they hold your fate in their hands. And then what happens when there's another layoff? There's a disproportionate number of, when you look at the layoff numbers in the tech industry in Silicon Valley, there's a disproportionate number of immigrants that are sponsored that are laid off. They're usually part of the first or a greater number of people laid off.
Well, people who aren't doing the job are also happening to be immigrants. So, I mean, I think I can see why the numbers are
Absolutely.
bad. So by the way, O1, how long can someone be on O1? Like, can
Forever.
forever be extending that O1 on a regular basis?
My first O1, I think they didn't want the green card because for tax reasons, but they've had something like 6 of them.
6 of them.
Yeah.
So like three years,
18 years.
18 years on
O1.
O1. Okay,
Yeah.
got it. And once you get accepted one time for O1, like, I mean, it's a lot easier to get the second O1.
Yeah, as long as whoever you're working with is making sure to make your case stronger, so to update it, because you have to prove what's called sustained a claim.
Sustained it.
So if you won an award 7 years ago, it doesn't have as much weight as if you won it last week. So you always have to be building. As an attorney, my job is always to make each case stronger. There's nothing you can just, as they say, mail it in and you get an approval.
No, that's
That's almost impossible with
Yeah.
the system that we have.
So we were talking about Elon Musk and like how much impact he has created. You probably are seeing like he's a big supporter of Donald Trump right now, and he's like saying that Trump is a better president. Now, I mean, I have my own opinions about Trump, and you have your own opinions about Trump.
Yeah.
When we saw the last tenure of Trump, like, I mean, it was pretty rough, I guess, right, on immigration.
I don't know if the numbers that are published are accurate, but I know from a personal experience, we had almost 500 cases approved in the 8 years under the Obama administration and 0 denials. And the denial rate under Trump was something like 500%.
500% means
Over Obama, 5 times as many denials of visa applications than there were under the Obama
like if
administration.
we look at the numbers, like if let's say filed 500 cases,
Probably.
in the Obama, you say like how many were denied?
It depends on the visa type.
Yeah.
But if there were 5 denied under Obama, there would have been 50 denied under Trump.
Very interesting.
And that changed people's perspectives. A lot of people decided not to move forward because they were almost directed to find reasons to deny.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking from a perspective of this talented Indian immigrant or someone, they're like, well, I mean, I am here trying to build my startup and I am like facing so much of resistance from everywhere. And they're like, I'm just going to base my company on Singapore or like, on Canada or like somewhere else or from India, run it from India or Dubai too, and not have to deal with this challenge again and again. Because I mean, it looks like as if you are only once, but sometimes there are families and kids, they're schooling.
Almost always, yeah. There's the history of an entire nuclear family changes depending on the outcomes of these cases.
Yeah.
So going back to your question, I have a singular focus when I focus on presidential elections and things like that. What's most important to me, I've always voted Democrat. I'm a moderate, but all I care about is how will it affect immigration, quite honestly, because I feel like if the immigration policies are solid and they're open to the right people, not illegal immigration, but legal immigration that's merit-based, then the economy will prosper.
Yeah.
I will prosper, my clients will prosper, but the economy as a whole will also prosper.
And we all would be like, if the prosperity on the planet increases when the right people get to lead.
Yeah.
Right?
I think there's a fear for people who, anywhere in the world, you see this in Argentina in moments of crisis, in Hungary, where my grandparents were from, there was a shift from one extreme to the other. When the economy is struggling, people start to think, I need to protect my own interests. And then that leads them to think, immigrants will take this away from me. When they don't realize that the immigrants, the ones that we're helping, the legal immigration, we're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs that will include Americans almost all the time.
So, Donald Trump has given like multiple perspectives about it. On one side, he said recently, like, gonna stamp a green card on everyone who graduates from here, right? And then we know about all these denial rates that he had in the past. Like, and Elon Musk is like himself an immigrant. He keeps saying like, I am pro legal immigration, like, So, I mean, what do you feel like is happening? Because probably the last time, maybe Trump did also mess up and his team messed up and they also realized that, okay, no, that was not good, because he's changing his opinion. And whenever he's saying that I'm going to step a green card to anyone with graduate degree, he's also repelling a part of his audience, which has happened to be like let's say a lot of Americans. So if he's saying it, it probably does what would you say about this?
That was probably the most shocking thing that he's ever said.
Yeah,
Because it's completely the opposite of everything of his discourse for the last 8+ years.
Yeah.
I don't see how it really makes any sense. It's also not possible to do the way the system is set up, but it just didn't make any sense because it doesn't correlate with everything else he's saying. And then that's the problem when it comes to a political election year, is that the messaging will keep changing depending on what the audience wants to hear. Because people don't understand how complex immigration is. I don't think the typical sort of American that's been here, whose family's been here for 400 years, has any idea what he's even talking about or how it affects them. Because in the end, every person, when you do know your audience, every person interprets things differently, and they think about how will this affect me. And so that comment, I don't think that it affected anybody who would have voted for him or changed a vote, but it really did not make any sense. And I don't think he's, mentioned it again, because probably somebody said to him, this doesn't make sense. Especially when he was railing on his first campaign before he became president. His biggest thing was getting rid of H-1B.
Yeah.
Because he thought that did lead employers to replace American workers,
Now, I think, as you said, I think I'm hearing there are two things you are saying: legal immigration and illegal immigration.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, what do you mean by illegal immigration?
Well, principally what it means is that people are entering the U.S. without authorization to enter. And then the middle ground there is asylum. So there are many people that should, and depending on their specific circumstances and what's called well-founded fear of persecution, they do meet the standard because they're coming from places that their lives are at risk.
Yeah.
And they should qualify for asylum. But in order to qualify for asylum, you either have to go to a border crossing or you have to be physically in the U.S. And so one thing that they're talking about is how can people apply from other places? And if they meet the test, then they can travel to the U.S. and go into the asylum system. The problem with that not existing as a possibility is it forces people to the border, or it forces them to enter illegally. And that's what illegal immigration is. What we want to do is, number one, stem the tide of illegal immigration, which unfortunately I do believe means that we have to have a physical border. And we have,
even Trump was planning to construct a border. So you think the wall is a way to.
I think it would be very painful financially for the country to do that. But it sends a message that this is not okay. You have to go through proper channels.
Okay.
What does that mean? That means that people can go to the border checkpoints, and there are dozens of them along the border, and apply what's called a proactive asylum application, right? Instead of coming in and putting their lives at risk and funding a whole industry of what they call coyotes that are paid to smuggle them into the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely, there was a breaking point for me where I was like, okay, so what they are telling people from India right now is hey, come from India, sit in a chartered plane, we will pay for you, come through the southern part of of America, you enter through Mexico and seek asylum, and you get a green card in 5 years. And here I see a person who's well educated, came on merit, got great education at Harvard, Stanford, top colleges here, and then they have to wait for 100+ years to get a green card because they followed the laws. And I was like, what are you really teaching the world if you are the leader of the world? As a country, you are teaching the world that, hey, this is the better way to live. And here you are, people who are following the law, you are not showing them a path, which is the right path, that, hey, you will have freedom or you work hard. And here you are in a way, you're rewarding the experience, which is the bad experience, and you are not rewarding the experience, which is the right experience. And I'm what is right and what is wrong? I'm myself confused.
Which is why I said the numerical caps per country, numerical caps in general, have to be eliminated.
Yes.
Because then you're sending you have illegal immigration. What you're saying is legal immigration is for everyone that qualifies.
Yes.
Right? And you're not putting a cap that has no basis in any sort of economic underpinning or anything real.
Yeah.
Because it's not like some economists show that there's a threshold number of immigrants per year, and then the system breaks or the economy suffers.
Mm.
And because that doesn't exist, the numerical caps need to be eliminated. At the same time, you need to stop illegal immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And one way, unfortunately, to do that is to cut off the borders and make people apply for asylum. If you make them apply or allow them to apply for asylum from their home countries, then you won't have people dying, going all the way from Guatemala, across Panama, and up through Mexico, risking their lives. Thousands of people lose their lives every year unnecessarily because they're desperate to get to the border. And then a lot of them don't qualify for asylum, but that's why they enter illegally, not at the checkpoint, but in between. And then they become part of this broken system here, and the number of illegal aliens, as they're called, increases and increases.
I mean, the way I look at it, like in a long run, like, there are 300 million people in this country, and like, I mean, more and more people don't have a legal state, right? If someone doesn't have a legal status in this country, they are very much in fear. Like, you cannot be courageous when you are in fear,
Right.
And they are like all in fear. And if you want to build a better country or a better world, you cannot build it on fear. So if a significant percentage of the population does not have rights and they are all living in fear in a country, which is happening to a lot of people in Dhaka, which is happening to a lot of people in backlogs, like, then you cannot build a great country out of it.
No, it becomes a country divided. To me, we're living in two Americas at the same time. There's the people that live in the shadows, and there's people that live in the light, right? In the daylight. And that number of people that have to live in the shadows is increasing. People like the dreamers for Dhaka, they live in between. They live right on the line, where they half of them is in the light, but they can't get to, live in that first world because there's no way to transition from Dhaka to a status.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I was talking to someone a couple of days ago who said there is this kid who kind of moved when he was like 4 years old with his parents. Like, he's now probably in his 30s or something, and he's still in fear every day about his life here. And I mean, I just think from this kid's perspective, like, this kid has done nothing wrong in this world, because 4 years is like such an age where you don't even know anything,
Right.
You're just like following what your parents do.
Well,
And
I'm one of those kids in that if my mom wasn't a U.S. citizen, if she had brought me to the U.S. at 5, I would have been a dreamer, or I would have aged out, and I wouldn't have qualified. And then I would be, because of an arbitrary date for DACA where they had to cut it off on a specific date, I wouldn't have qualified, right? It's unfair that people have to live and be penalized for the actions of their parents. And that's what a lot of kids that are brought in illegally go through, because there's almost no way to then fix your status if you come in what's called entry without inspection, EWI, or illegal entry.
So if I'm understanding, like, from just like trying to paint a picture, you said you believe in borders. So borders definitely help people move through a proper protocol. You believe in eliminating country caps because they are arbitrary. You believe in merit.
Yes.
You believe in getting people out of Dhaka because something that their parents did, they should not be,
like being blamed for the sins of your father.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You want to get biblically.
Yes.
It's not fair.
Yeah, that's not fair. So people from Dhaka should all be, in a way, be cleared out. People on country cap should all be cleared out if they have been waiting for a long time. Set up the border in the right way. So these are the ways you think the immigration system needs to be fixed.
It does. And the gray area really of all this is, let's say you secure the border and you have a system in place for people to properly apply for asylum, because a lot of people file asylum claims that are, they're called frivolous claims. They're not based in any real foundation, and they won't qualify, but they can still live in the U.S. or disappear and stay forever, or get work authorization for years. You have to fix the asylum system, secure the borders. What happens to the people who already entered illegally and they're not going to leave? Then that's the issue that I think with President Trump, it would be very hard to agree. And I side more on the Obama side, which was eventual amnesty. But you have to you have to do it immediately, like you say, as of today, because otherwise, if you leave a margin of time, there'll be a flood of more people trying to get in to get the amnesty. If you don't grant amnesty, what President Trump is saying is essentially that he wants to deport 15 million people. And you can't mass deport people. Each person has to have due process and the chance to prove, find a remedy to be able to stay. And there's no way this immigration system can handle 15 million cases through the courts. So I think the only realistic option is to find a way to give people amnesty.
So, there was this one president in the history of America who kind of just like cleared the backlogs on one day. He was like, I keep forgetting the name of the president. I think he's a Republican, and when he came to power, he's like, whoever is in here right now, they should all be given a green card, and we have to fix the immigration system. But this is just like through an executive order. He cleared a lot of backlogs. Probably I think in 2000s also. Or one time it happened in 1990s too.
Yeah, well, George W. Bush, I think, was the finest example of where I realized it doesn't matter what party you're from, because he has been pro-immigrant since the beginning. Even now he's retired and he paints portraits. He did a book of immigrant portraits.
Wow.
Regardless of whether you like the art or not, the point was he humanized immigrants with different faces, different people from all over the world. And the message behind that was, we're all human. Let these people be a part of the American social fabric. Let them be a full part of society. Celebrate them. And in that way, he was the most progressive Republican president that's existed. And that's what we need. We need to throw the political parties out the window and think on a human level, what is fair on a human level, and what is equitable, and what is the best long-term for the United States as a whole. And there's no arguments that can be made that would dissuade me from believing that immigrants do help the country progress. And therefore, that's what should be behind all immigration policy.
Very good. My last question to you, Steve, here is, if let's say you become the US president, and you have a very depth of understanding about not just immigration law, but understanding the political system too, and the things that you believe in. What are the things you will do to just like get the immigration system in a way better place? Because when I keep listening to it, it's like comprehensive reform, and I'm not seeing any comprehensive reform happening anytime soon. And there are lives which are getting impacted on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
What do you think someone like you would do if you get to like such a powerful position?
Well, the irony of your question, Atal, is that if we don't change the law, I am not allowed to be the U.S. president because I wasn't born in the United States.
Oh,
So I can be vice president.
yes.
And vice presidents don't really have a lot of impact on changing laws. And so the first thing that would have to happen is somebody would have to come before me and change that law, which I believe is also completely arbitrary. But there's a reason why, and that's because immigrants are not fully accepted as part of the American.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that's just not right. I mean, that is also a decision and fear in a way that, hey, I think whenever I talk about these things, someone's going to bring a perspective that, oh, we don't want Chinese influence on it, on Russian influence on it, or some country's influence on it, or someone becoming the president of the US who is like not. But I mean, dude, like if you have been living in a country for like 20 years, like you who have pretty much spent the whole life here.
Yeah.
And you cannot be, then who can be,
I think that's exactly right. I think what it's saying is we will always be, according to the American sort of political machine, we will always be second-class citizens. The fact that term even exists means that you can be a U.S. citizen, but if you are an immigrant, you may be seen as sort of second tier, like not completely American.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I could not be president. And that's because I just happened to be born somewhere else.
And just 4 years of being born there, and you are like,
and I'm here, and it doesn't count. Just like DACA dreamers.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Do I believe we need comprehensive reform? There's no question. But that means that the country has to unify on this one front. And we live in a very divisive country. We would have to change the entire political system where all views are taken in, and maybe even third parties can have seats in Congress and things like that, like have a real voice. That voice isn't heard. It's a chicken and egg dilemma. If the voice is suppressed, then we can never get to that next level, because everybody needs to understand that we all benefit. Everybody benefits. Even a farmer in Georgia benefits. Like H2 visas, if there's a limit on agricultural workers per year, that farmer can't hire somebody locally. They're going to go out of business. We're not going to have fruit to eat on our table. Like it has a trickle down effect on all of American society. Like that, I don't know if you saw the film. It's called Un Día Sin Mexicanos, A Day Without Mexicans.
No, I have not seen it.
You only need to see 10 minutes of the film because the premise is clear. Everybody wakes up in Los Angeles one day. There are no Mexicans. They don't exist anymore. And there's nobody there working, landscaping, picking the fruit, taking care of the children, cooking the food in the kitchens, in the restaurants. Like the society just completely breaks down. And that's because we live in a society with two worlds in parallel. And that world has to come together for us to really maximize our strength. And America's greatest strength is our diversity. Ideas, cultures, everything that comes into the picture in terms of what drives our economy and what makes us unique. What always made America unique for years is that we were an immigrant country. But that mentality has been pushed to the side, and now it's become divisive. So I think, I could become president if that law changed, but then I'd still have to change the mentality that exists.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this has been very insightful. And thank you so much for sharing your honest opinions about a lot of things. Is there anything, last thing you want to share about your, just like the whole journey that you want to give?
I think that the message I have for people is that you cannot give up hope. Hope is what drives all immigrants. That's what brings them here. That's what makes us work so hard from wherever we come from. We have to keep pushing forward. We have to become the model for everyone else to show, look how great we've become. Look how much we've helped the lives of others. Let more of us be part of this world.
Thank you so much for being here, Steve. Really appreciate you. And yeah, looking forward to feedback from our audience about what they think. And if they have more questions around immigration, I mean, you have been a great partner with us. So
yes,
if they need any help on the immigration, please reach out. And just like we are here to push the state of immigration ahead. So thank you for sharing all your opinions around it.
an honor to be with you, Atal. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.